This is part 4 of Chapter 51's lecture, and we left off talking about social interaction requiring communication, and that communication takes the form of a signal given off from one individual to another. So animals can communicate these signals using visual, chemical, tactile or physical, and auditory signals. And it's interesting because a fruit fly courtship actually has a number of these types of communication involved in it. And it actually has 3 steps to it. And so because there are multiple steps, we call it a stimulus response chain, where one step leads to another. And so they actually have to come in the right sequence. And each of them, you'll see, takes a different form. So the first one is visual communication. There's a recognition of the female by appearance. So the male identifies that female of the same species and orients towards her. So that's a physical and visual communication. The next step is a chemical communication. There's a transmission and reception of signals in specific chemicals released by the female and detected by the male's olfactory, or what you smell with, system. So now we've got visual, chemical. The next stage is going to actually have tactile communication. So once that chemical communication has occurred, then the male will approach the female and tap the female with a foreleg. This tactile communication alerts the female to the male's presence. In that, at the same time, because of this tapping, chemicals present on her abdomen will be transferred to the male, providing more chemical confirmation, more chemical stimuli of her species identity. The final stage of courtship, the male is going to extend and vibrate his wing, producing a specific courtship song. So in this case, now we have auditory communication. And this tells the female whether the male is of the same species. So only when all of these forms of communication are successful does mating actually occur. Another type of communication, again, is the use of pheromones. So pheromones are a type of chemical released from one individual to another, and it can be used actually in 2 different ways, both in sexual reproduction, in attracting a mate, but also in communicating alarm or danger. So in the case of these minnows, they are spaced out in the first picture here on the left, but then one of the fish will give off a pheromone, release a chemical into the water. In the upper left-hand corner, the top fish does that. And so all the minnows then know to get away within seconds. They are moving away and clumping together to get away from that chemical signal. Other ways that pheromones are used as chemical communication is a mother rabbit will release a scent to her young that she's able to nurse them. Or a female moth can attract a male from several kilometers away. Animals also use pheromones to mark their territory, or to, as you can see with the lions, attract a mate. Here, this is just kind of a funny cartoon on the use of pheromones. But sometimes animals use pheromones in a way that they're not really intended to be used. They're actually, when they're used as a way to lure a prey. So the spider will use a moth sex pheromone. So it will release the moth sex pheromone to lure a moth to its web so it can eat it. And the use of a pheromone in this way is called allomones. Now, honeybees are really interesting in terms of how they communicate. And their ability to use cognition, again, is pretty remarkable. You think of insects as being so very simple, but they really are remarkable in what they can do. So I'm going to show you a video of how they actually use physical communication and also auditory, to communicate the location of their food sources. This video is from National Geographic. So kind of amazing, the complexity of their communication. All that just got cut off there, but what I was saying is how complex their communication is, and just by using this dance, they're able to communicate a lot to each other. Another type of communication that we're very familiar with is the song that birds primarily use, but also insects. And bird song is used by species to identify each other as part of the mating ritual to attract a mate. It is both learned and innate, and we touched on that a little bit earlier, because there's a critical learning period involved in that learning that has to occur. So birds can make the sounds, but in terms of learning the particular song, it has to actually be modeled and then copied and learned during that critical period. Insect songs are used in, again, reproduction. They are innate, and that means they're going to be the same from individual to individual. They're genetically controlled, which is, again, very much a part of being innate, something that they've inherited from their parents. I'd like you to pause and use the table here. Oops, get my phone off. Use the table here as a way to summarize what you've learned. So pause this and copy this and put it in your notes. Make sure that you can come up with an example of a signal in communication, because this is very important that you're able to, in terms of this course in AP Biology, you need to be able to give practical examples. So it goes beyond memorizing definitions, such as a signal is a behavior that causes a change in another animal's behavior. You actually need to be able to give examples and talk about how you apply that definition in a real world setting. The next type of behavior we're going to discuss is called agonistic behavior. And this is the type of behavior that is aggressive, it's threatening in one case and submissive in another. It's symbolic. Usually there's no harm done, even though it can look very violent or very aggressive. But usually there isn't a lot of harm done. Examples of agonistic behavior is when there's issues of marking a territory, or in terms of mating and outcompeting another male, usually, for reproductive rights. So this is showing you an example of agonistic behavior. These are monitor lizards that are fighting to compete for the privilege of mating with a female. So these are male monitor lizards. These pictures here show some more agonistic behavior. But what I wanted to stop and talk about is the concept of sexual selection. So sexual selection occurs, it's a part of natural selection, and it has to do with organisms' ability to have reproductive success. And there are two types of sexual selection that occurs. There is intersexual selection, INTER, and that means we have selection occurring between two different sexes. So, for example, a female is going to choose which male she wants to mate with. That is intersexual selection. The other type of sexual selection is intrasexual, INTRA, sexual selection. And in that case, we have the same gender or the same sex. So in the case of agonistic behavior, we have males that are fighting each other in order to have reproductive success. So the inter is between the sexes or genders, and intra is in competition within the same gender or sex. So that is, again, going to define agonistic behavior, which is going to be occurring only in intrasexual selection. Another part of this social behavior is dominance hierarchy. And in this case, that is just the social ranking that occurs within a group. And a lot of times this is going to be due to that agonistic behavior, where you have the same gender again, and sometimes also we have the difference between, like in lions, you can have it between the different genders of the organisms of that population or species. And so this has to do more with social ranking than just sexual selection. Another part of mating systems that I just want to digress a little bit and talk about is sexual dimorphism. So mating relationships define a number of distinct mating systems. And in some species, mating is what we call promiscuous, where there are no strong pair bonds or lasting relationships. The opposite of this would be a monogamous relationship, where one male mates with one female. So males and females with monogamous mating systems often have similar external morphologies. And those that are in promiscuous reproductive or mating systems actually have very different external morphologies. So, for example, when I talk about morphology, that is the outward appearance of the different genders. So, for example, a peacock, where the male is very brightly colored and the female is not. That is an example of a promiscuous mating system where there is no strong pair bonding occurring, as opposed to, for example, penguins, where there is pair bonding that occurs. And if you look at a male and a female penguin, there's not a lot of difference in how they appear on the outside. So, two definitions you should know is polygyny and polyandry. In polygyny, one male mates with many females. In polyandry, one female mates with many males. So in each of these cases, the gender that is doing the competing in order to get the reproductive success is the one that's going to be showy. So that in polygyny, the males are the ones who are mating with many females. So they're going to be more showy, larger. They're going to look different. You're going to see those morphologic differences or dimorphism, which is a separation of the two genders and how they look. In polyandry, the females doing the competing, and so the females are going to be more showy to attract as many mates as possible.